Alright, you beautiful history vampires and late-night meme historians. Strap the hell in and disable your moral compass, because we're performing a full-blown, an anesthetized autopsy on the single most successful corporate takeover in human history. A hostile merger so brutally efficient, it makes The Godfather look like a charitable foundation. I'm talking about the Sinaloa Cartel, but forget the Netflix fanfiction. We're exposing the real, raw, and absolutely psychotic business plan that turned a bunch of mountain-dwelling weed farmers into a multinational, blood-soaked conglomerate. Their CEO, a man whose name sounds like a rejected luxury coffee brand, Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo. This smelly, mustachioed visionary wasn't a thug. He was the Steve Jobs of crime. If Steve Jobs solved supply chain issues with a chainsaw and used human skulls as paperweights. His genius, he looked at the scattered, disorganized Mexican drug trade and saw a franchise opportunity. He was the Ray Kroc of cocaine, linking all the regional plazas, your local crime McDonald's, into one seamless, murderous network. He was the architect of the first truly corporate empire of crime. But every empire needs a killer product, and these Sinaloa hillbillies, God bless their unwashed, entrepreneurial souls, they were agricultural mad scientists. They didn't just grow your grandpa's swag, oh no! They pioneered Sinsemilla, seedless weed. This was the agricultural equivalent of splitting the atom. It required isolation, precision, and a level of botanical genius that would get them a Nobel Prize if they weren't too busy using shovels to bury their enemies. They weren't just criminals, they were criminal horticulturists. The Elon Musks of marijuana, if Elon Musk's primary funding came from dismembering his competitors. And then the Colombians showed up, the OGs. Pablo Escobar and the Medellin Cartel, the rock stars with private zoos and private armies. They needed a new route to the States, and they looked at Mexico and thought, perfect. Well, use these simple, backwards farmers as our mules. They're just the help. It was the corporate equivalent of Blockbuster laughing at Netflix. The single greatest strategic miscalculation since the Maginot Line. The Mexicans looked at the Colombians and saw a beautiful, beautiful opportunity for a vertical integration. They were like, you know what? We're not just the delivery boys. We're taking the whole damn company. So they did what any rational, profit-driven entity would do in a free market. They initiated a hostile takeover. They started killing the Colombians and keeping the product. It was the most violent corporate merger in history. Their board meetings were held in mass graves, and the only thing on the agenda was acquire, terminate, expand. But this is where the story evolves from ruthless corporation to full-blown, privatized military-industrial complex. Enter the Zetas, and no, I'm not talking about a college fraternity. The Zetas were a paradigm shift so seismic, it broke the scale. They didn't start as criminals. They started as an elite unit of the Mexican military, special forces. The best of the best, trained by the CIA and the Israeli Mossad. Their leader, a guy known as Z1, basically looked at his government paycheck, did the math on his skill set, and filed for the most dramatic career change in history. He took his talents to the private sector. Imagine if a team of Navy SEALs quit and became the enforcers for Amazon. That's the level of escalation we're talking about. The Zetas weren't a gang, they were a publicly traded army of psychopaths. A PMC where the C stood for cartel. They brought tactics, discipline, and a level of brutality that was previously confined to the darkest corners of the internet. They weren't just sending a message, they were writing it in human entrails and using a corpse as the envelope. Their HR department's onboarding process was just a snuff film. This is where corporate strategy gets creatively monstrous. The Zetas weaponized terror as a market disruption tool. It wasn't enough to kill a rival. You had to decapitate him, put his head on a spike in the town square, and use his phone to text his mom got a new gig, can't talk. This was psychological operations. This was brand management through pure, unadulterated, soul-crushing fear. And the most cosmically ironic part, some of their most effective techniques. They literally learned from the CIA's own playbook. That's right. Your American tax dollars indirectly funded the training manual for the most terrifying torturers on the planet. You're welcome, shareholders in hell. The Mexican government's response was, naturally, an all-out war. This wasn't a police action. This was the equivalent of the US military declaring war on Blackwater. It was a live-fire corporate dispute where the battlefield was an entire country. And this conflict created a power vacuum so massive, it sucked in every lunatic with a gun and a dream, turning the nation into a free fire zone for competing business models. And through the smoke and rivers of blood, the Sinaloa Cartel, our old guard of mustachioed entrepreneurs, watched, adapted, and outsourced. They saw the Zetas, these tactical, disciplined psychos, as the new, well-funded startup trying to disrupt their market share. The Uber to their taxi medallion. So what did they do? They fought back with a blend of old-school bribery and new-school brutality. It was the deadliest, most savage corporate rivalry ever recorded. Sinaloa's pragmatic, business-first murder versus the Zetas' military-grade, shock and awe insanity. A battle for market dominance where the quarterly reports were written in body counts. The violence became so abstract, so over the top, it entered the realm of performance art. In talking about the chainsaw videos that circulated on the old, pre-monetized internet, I won't describe them, but let's just say they involved power tools and a philosophical debate about the meaning of pain that would make a French intellectual vomit into his beret. This wasn't just killing, this was a statement. A press release written in viscera, but here is the beautiful, darkly comedic twist. The Mexican government finally catches a bunch of these Zetas, and they parade them in front of the press to humiliate them, to show the people they'd won. And you know what happened? The public saw these jacked, tactical gear-clad stone-cold killers with their 1,000-yard stares, and they've seen the abyss, and it gave me a promotion demeanor. And a part of people was like, damn, these guys have a better brand identity and cooler merch than our own army. The government's PR campaign backfired spectacularly. They accidentally made them look like the ultimate outlaw rock stars. It was the worst brand dilution since New Coke. This whole magnificent circus of horrors inevitably drew in the big dog, the United States. And the bright, neon red line was the murder of the agent Kiki Camarena. The cartels tortured him for days in ways so creatively horrific, it would make a medieval executioner file for workplace harassment. That was the line, you don't kill American federal agents. That was the moment the US government dropped the kid gloves, lit them on fire, and brought in a tactical nuke disguised as a sledgehammer. The full, unadulterated, freedom-loving weight of American fury came down on them. It was the ultimate regulatory crackdown, so where does this leave us in the grand, bloody ledger of history? The cartels have evolved, they've diversified their portfolio. They're not just drug companies anymore, they're full-service multinational conglomerates. They're in avocados, oil, human trafficking, lithium mining. They're the Berkshire Hathaway of brutality, a dark, twisted mirror of hyper-capitalism itself, proving that the free market, when utterly unleashed, will always find its most efficient, most monstrous form. The final, brutal, and sarcastic as hell takeaway? The Sinaloa Cartel and its rivals are the ultimate example of free market capitalism, stripped of all pretense, morals, and legal frameworks. They identified a demand and built a bulletproof supply chain with an iron fist. They innovated in agriculture, logistics, and human resources, where human resources meant literally resourcing humans until they were no longer a resource. They are a terrifying, brutal, and darkly brilliant case study in what happens when the profit motive is completely, utterly, and savagely unleashed. They didn't break the system, they just followed its logic to the most horrific, logical, and financially rewarding conclusion. If you made it this far through the abyss, you're a real one. Your brain is now 300% more dangerous at any cocktail party. So do me a solid, smash that like button if your worldview is even slightly fractured. Subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into history's most savage and successful enterprises. Tap the bell because next week, we're tearing apart another historical hero, and it's going to be so controversial, the algorithm might have a panic attack. Let me know in the comments, who was the ultimate business strategist? Felix Gallardo the franchise king, or the Zetas the corporate raiders from hell? I read every single one. Alright, that's enough existential dread and corporate espionage for one night. I'm out.